democratizing history writing to individuals and private groups, who private funding to without state patronage, where multiple voices then emerge. And I think it's a churn that's happening even within the in the academic space. Of course, there the stranglehold of a particular group and ideology is so intense that it may take much longer to liberate ourselves from that. But I think once options are put in front, alternative options are put in front of the young people, they would then start questioning those who are teaching the opposite of what they are actually learning outside, coming across things elsewhere, and slowly it would take a long time to actually liberate that. And I think that's one reason some of the early freedom fighters, including we're celebrating 150 years of Shri Aurobindo. One of the major agenda points along with Swaraj and all of that for Shri Aurobindo was a national education policy, which is free from this colonial mindset. And mind you, he and his group, which was the Nationalist Party, which is otherwise in parlance called the extremist faction, had come up with this national education policy. The national colleges in different parts of Bengal that came up during the early decades of the 20th century attest to that. So the vision was there. We've got derailed somewhere in the process. But I think while it may take time to get there, step by step, it would take effort by individuals initially, and then the catapulting effect of that, snowballing into a larger movement. That is what it would take to actually liberate our education system too from the stranglehold of ideology.
And one last comment from you, Dr. Sampath. Do you feel that during freedom struggle, somehow the idea of cultural expression, of Hinduness, if I may use the word of Indianness, was turned into a taboo, something which in academic journalistic narrative stood against a secular state, though the secular word was inserted in the constitution during emergency, but against a constitution which was inspired by American and British constitutions. So do you feel that it became a taboo in 40s, 50s, 60s, and that same politics has still run the course?
Yes, very much. I think in the Hindu imagery, particularly in the revolutionary stream of the freedom movement. I mean, whether it was Bengal, whether it was Punjab, Maharashtra, from Durga to Bhavani to Chandi, the invocation of the divine feminine, Bharat Mata, as a the divine feminine version of that, and all the revolutionaries. In fact, during my research on Savarkar in the British Library in London, some of the proscribed material and advertisements and pamphlets of those times, I was going through that, and I found this beautiful picture of all of these people, Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru, themselves, cutting off their heads and offering it to the smiling visage of a Bharat Mata who's accepting it with a lot of, benediction and grace. So this whole idea, the Hindu-ness of it, and as Shri Aurobindo called it, Bhavani Bharati, and the Shakti of the nation, that the spiritual underpinnings of freedom, which all those people, right from whether it was Swami Vivekananda or Sri Aurobindo or others, who spoke not merely of political freedom, which is one aspect of freedom, probably the easier aspect to achieve. The larger aspect is the spiritual resurgence of India and this cultural emancipation from centuries and centuries of domination and invasions. That is still a work in progress. Though we have achieved political autonomy, I think this cultural resurgence, the spiritual strength of India, which is what stands her apart in the world, that if we go back to the works of some of these great savants and sages who guided our freedom movement in that part of the century. I think that is very important to get back to those roots now if we want to truly decolonize ourselves.
Kanchan sir, your closing comment. Do you agree with Dr. Sampath?
Yes, I think Vikram makes a lot of sense in saying what he said just now. But I remain skeptical. I remain skeptical because what has happened is that in the process of modernizing the country, and we somehow never were able to grasp the meaning of modernization or the so-called scientific temper. We were never able to figure out what actually is scientific temper. That to be a scientist or to be a promoter of science, you don't have to cut out spirituality or religion or faith from your life or from the national life. This whole thing of modern temples of India was again something which was it was conceived to sort of destroy India's Indic identity. One could go on and on and on. But I think the time has come to aggressively and robustly resist calumny which has been sort of promoted, sanctified, and legitimized as history. I could just give you one small example. This whole thing of constantly rebuking Savarkar by saying that he was he was the man who came up with the idea of two nation theory. No, that is so horribly untrue. It was Sir Syed who came up with the idea that Muslims and Hindus can't live together. And Veer Savarkar is Veer Savarkar is born way after Sir Syed's enunciation of two nation theory. So when the Muslim League decided that they can't be a part of a united India, it's not because of what Veer Savarkar had said or written in Hindutva. Their inspiration point was Sir Syed. But we won't say it. Why won't we say it? Because it is so unsecular to say it. Again, Vikram is the Savarkar scholar. I don't wish to go on that path. But the little I understand of Savarkar's Hindutva is that he tried to cast the Hindu way of life in a manner that he saw it should be. Again, he's not the first one to do that. Chandranath Basu in Bengal, he wrote a book called Hindutva in 1892. So this has been a part of India's Indic tradition of trying to define, of trying to sort of suggest the Hinduness of India, and that Hinduness is not necessarily a communal identity. I mean, we can talk of Hindu nationalism, but actually, essentially, if you filter all this jibber jabber over Hindu nationalism, the filtrate which you will get is cultural nationalism. And it is a fact that this entire nation is held together by its cultural ethos, by its cultural identity, by its cultural heritage. So this is a debate which has actually been going on for some time. It is only now that it has come to occupy a sizable space in the public domain. It is only now that we have young, bright voices like Vikram speaking up and many others who are joining in. And hopefully, these voices will increase over a period of time. And and we shall then have, as Vikram says, that there's a churn happening. And from this churn shall emerge some some ways and means of rescuing our history from charlatans, from state sponsored charlatans, and telling the India story as it is. And unless that story is told, till such time that story is told, there can never be a sort of uh, a realization of, we know that what are we? We are a culture, we are a civilizational nation. Who are we? We are a people. And unless that realization will crystallize only when we get to know where do we come from. And once we know where do we come from, we can think in terms of where do we go from here. During the Ayodhya agitation days, there used to be this one line. If I remember correctly, it went something like this. It was a play. It was a play on tenses. Past imperfect, future tense, and that still holds. So long as your past is imperfect, your future can never be free of tension.